I had a friend text last night, thanks Andrea, um, and say, hey, I think you should let us hear this song. And then she sent me a devotional, and read it, and it was really good. She basically, the gist of it was they were going over the passage in Ezekiel, I think it's 37, about the valley of dry bones and Elisha prophesying over them, or Elijah prophesying over them, and bringing them to life. And for those of you who don't know that story, it's an amazing story of uh, God calling one of his sons, Elijah, that would hear him and listen to him and obey him, to breathe life over this valley of this army of dry bones. And originally, that's why I had written a song. And over the years, I mean, I wrote it way before we went to Mozambique. It's one of the ones I've done frequently in worship, and one of the ones that's probably the most memorable for friends and stuff. So, but as she was saying that, for me, she was just saying, hey, in this situation where breath is so important, to those who are suffering with corona, or even to most of us who aren't, because of fear. And we know all the verses, like people say, perfect love casts out fear. And many times we forget what it says in front of it. It says, in love, there is no fear, for perfect love casts out fear. Well, what does that mean? That means if I have a fear problem, it's because I have a love problem. We don't want to go there sometimes. We don't want to talk about those things. But in love, there is no fear. So what does that mean? If I'm really fearful, well, we need to check our heart. You have a love problem. And a love of what? I don't know. You got to ask the Lord and ask him what he's asking. And then also with fear, it takes our breath away. It takes our faith away. We've heard a lot of times that faith is the opposite of fear or whatever. For me, I kind of feel like faith is fear. It's the same thing. It's just fear is that powerful. Well, what do you, it's the same thing. If I'm believing in something that the Lord hasn't given, if it's something from the enemy, it's something that's not even gonna happen or hasn't happened yet, I'm fearful of it. Well, why am I fearful of it? Because I have faith in it happening, but it hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. It's not in his plan to happen. It's the enemy's plan for it to happen. And so a lot of times I'd heard a pastor say that once, that fear and faith are the same thing. Jesus' words a lot of times to his people were, fear not. Well, the first thing he'd say, the angels, most of the time an angel comes on the scene, he says, fear not. And so when she sent me this last night, I was beginning to think through, like, it's one of those friends that I heed what they say because I know they listen to the Lord. And I want to encourage you guys with the word and some just a song of worship. And breath is important right now. It's really important. What we say, what we do, how we act, and then what we breathe in is spiritually important right now. And sometimes I take that for granted that, I'm here in the storage room in Mozambique, Africa, and I've had different places that the Lord's had me meet with them over the years in the mornings, and committed to spending time with the Father, not because I need to get through the day, but because I can't get through the day without him, because I love him too much. Like, the Father is so important to me that if I don't spend time with him, I can't breathe. Or what I breathe out isn't good. It's not life-giving. And that was the first thing Jesus did, was he breathed life. But we forget that he also, the first thing he said is, let there be light. So Jesus is, God's first words through Jesus, confirmed in John 1, is that he says, let there be light. And in John 1 it says that Jesus is the Word become flesh. But before that it says, and in him was life, and that life was the light of all men. So again, it's back to the breath. And so I wanted to go to John 20 instead of Ezekiel. It prompted it, but John 20 has been the passage that I've been using with a lot of the disciples around here. It's been one of the key passages over the last 5 years that have helped bring these new disciples in Mozambique to Christ. because they see this and they go, I want it. I want him to breathe on me. In John 20, it says, on the evening of that day, this is right after the resurrection, Mary has seen Jesus at this point, and now she's going back to tell the disciples. It says, in John 20, verse 19, it says, on the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews. Are your guys' hearts locked right now? Are we locked up? Are we locked behind our doors? Are we locked in fear? Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, peace be with you. When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, even so I'm sending you. And when he had said this, he breathed on them. And then he said, receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven. If you withhold forgiveness from any, it is withheld. Brian Schroeder, man, I haven't seen you forever, bro. And Dane, it's good to see you guys on here. Hope this is encouraging. As a lot of my friends have heard me talk about this passage, it's such an encouraging and foundational one for me because of so many things. Like, we won't talk about those things of what we do in ministry and how we're supposed to love people and our neighbor, but in this one, I wanted to just focus on what he says and the situation. They're behind locked doors. They're scared for their lives. Jesus has just died, and they thought he was the hope of Israel, and they're freaked out behind closed, locked doors. And without opening the door, he's standing there. And the first thing he says is, peace be with you. That could be a whole sermon for us right now. Like, is that what we're saying in the stores to people? Is that what we're saying to our family behind? Peace be with you. And what's wild about it is he says it to them twice. I truly believe he was saying it to him twice for a reason. There's all kinds of spiritual reasons from the Old Testament, the New. We could go into prophecies and stuff, but the simplicity of it was he was saying the physical essence of peace be with you is with you. Like, he was giving them peace. And then the second thing he was saying was the person of peace be with you is really with you. And I thought, that's amazing, like twice. And then he breathes on them. So the breath of life was in him, and that life was the light of all men. And peace was the most important things that Jesus wanted to bring to them. Of all the things he could have said after the resurrection, he says that. And then he says, I'm sending you as the Father sent me. Well, in this situation, the Father had sent him. Obviously, before that, he sent him to heal disease. He sent him to forgive them of their sins ultimately on the cross, to reconcile them back to the Father, to love their neighbor, to do all those things that Jesus did. But really, it was to reconcile them to the Father. But if we read it from the present too, as the Father sent me would be in that moment. What moment? The moment of fear. They're behind locked doors. They're behind closed doors. They have no solution. They have no idea whether he was really the Messiah, and now they know. He says that to us. As the Father has sent me, I'm sending you. So right now, he has sent you. If you believe in him, if you've chosen him as your life, he has sent you in the moment of fear to breathe life and peace. To breathe life into a valley of dry bones. Into an army of people that could be living like this, like he's saying, and are locked up behind their doors, or their fears, or their hearts. I don't know how that looks for you guys. I don't know day to day what that's going to look like, but I know that he doesn't want you living in fear. I know that in love, perfect love casts out fear. I know that he wants you to breathe on people the breath of life. I know he wants you to bring peace to them. What's so awesome about this is why I wanted to confirm and finalize this word for you guys. I'll read a little bit more. Is Jesus does everything corporately and individually. Everything that he does in the Word is done corporately and individually. Even the generalness of the books, Old Testament and New Testament. The Old Testament word was a corporate word. The New Testament is an individual word. Because the Father is a corporate and an individual God. He's a family God, our Father. He's a family first God, our Father who art in heaven. And then he's an individual God also because he chose you. He came to die for the one if needed. The 99 he left and the one he went after. A corporate individual word. And I could spend hours on Thomas because it drives me crazy how a lot of pastors teach him as a doubting person. And my wife's probably laughing right now about that because I used to believe that too. But as I've been reading the book of John more and more, in John chapter 10, John chapter 11, when Lazarus is dying, at the end of that section, which is like verse 16-ish, in verse 11, Jesus is trying to tell the disciples that Lazarus has died. And Lazarus has been dead for 2 days, and they're coming back, or someone's coming back to tell him, your friend is asleep, and he's trying to explain to the disciples, he's not really asleep, he's dead. And what's funny is he says, for your sake, I'm glad that I wasn't there so that you'd see the glory of the Lord. So it's like, wow, what a good friend. He actually is glad he's dead. No, he's waiting because he knows what he's going to do. But the disciples say, it says in around verse 15, the disciples say, why would you go back there when they just tried to stone you there? And Jesus doesn't say anything. He says, Jesus says something. He says, let's read that little part. He says, why are you going back if they're trying to stone you, and are you going there again? And Jesus says, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. And that's when he says, he tells them, he's actually passed away. He's dead. And there is one person at the end of that little passage that says, let us go with Jesus and die with him. See, Thomas gets a really, really bad rap because of John 20, which I'm about to read to you. But he is the only one that says, let's go back to go see our dead friend Lazarus and get stoned to death. It's Thomas that says it. He says, let us go with Jesus and die with him. I thought, man, this guy wasn't a doubter. This is pre-Peter, taking the ear off the guard and all that stuff. Thomas, the one we give the hard time for. And if you've ever preached that, I'm not hammering you for it, but for me it was an exciting revelation that Thomas wasn't a doubter. He believed, and I'm going to confirm it with what I read right here. So after he says this to them in John 20 and shows up to them and says, he breathes life over them and gives them the Holy Spirit and says, go in peace the way the Father sent me. In verse 24 it says, now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, so we know it's the guy from Lazarus' story, was not with the guys, was not with them when Jesus came. That's a huge bummer. What if Jesus showed up to your friend's party and you weren't there, right? So the other disciples told him, right? Like we tell our friends stories. Dude, it was amazing. You can't believe it. We have seen the Lord, but he said to them, unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails and place my finger into the marks of the nails and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. And we read that and we say, whoa, like he's adamant. You know why he said that? If we were paying attention to the verses that are only 6 verses ahead, it says, when in verse 20, when Jesus had said this, what? Peace be with you. He showed them his hands and his side. So the first thing Jesus did to the corporate was showed his suffering for them. Some of us are suffering right now, and some of us are watching people suffer in their fear, and some of us are watching people suffer in the hospitals. We're supposed to show that we're suffering with them. And so Thomas says, what? He'd heard the stories. They're like, dude, he even showed us the sides of he showed us his marks. It was him. It was really him. And so what does he say? Unless I see it, I'm not going to believe. Does that make him a doubter? We'll see. 8 days later, 1 week later, His disciples were inside again. I love this. And Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, sounds exactly the same, doesn't it? Jesus came and stood among them and said, what do you think he said? Come on, shout it out. What do you think he said? Peace be with you. This is sounding a lot like the exact same thing he did for the group, isn't it? Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here and see my hands, and put on your hand and place into my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. Thomas answered him, my Lord and my God. Jesus said to him, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. He's talking to us in that. But he's not rebuking Thomas. This isn't a belief issue. We take it that way. Think about this. The way I told my disciples this was this. If my buddy Jory and I hadn't seen each other for 10 or 20 years, right? And during that 10 years, he heard a rumor that I had died. And I showed up in Arizona at my friend Billy Whitmore's house with their family, and they're there, and we're talking, having a good time, and he calls Jory and says, you'll never believe who I saw today. What is Jory's answer going to be? I don't believe it. Because the belief system is, he's gone. And, especially as Westerners, what's the belief system? I missed out. How did I miss out on my good friend and the time I could have had with him and the moment that you shared? I can't believe it because I want to experience it. I wanted, for a guy in John 11 that said, let's go die with him, I think that's how he was feeling. Of course he's not going to believe that he showed up. He was willing to die for him first. And then Jesus shows up to the group and he's not even there. Why do I say this? Because as much as I could focus on what John 20 is about in that, my friend said to talk about the breath. Jesus does things because he loves the whole group and us individually. And so if you feel like you don't have breath right now, like you don't have life right now, like fear is stripping you of your breath, of your life, Jesus is willing, he shows this, he's willing to come into the group setting and say to everyone, I'm here, and you can go in my authority and my love and my grace and help heal others and help bring love to others. And to the one who thinks that they're not worthy, the one that thinks, oh, I missed it too, or that's good for them, but I'm just one person. Jesus says, I'll do the exact same thing for you too. I'll come into your life, behind your locked doors, behind your fear, behind your breathless space. And I'll meet with you one-on-one, and I'll show you that you're right. Unless you saw it, unless you felt me, you wouldn't believe. And I knew that about you, and so I set this moment up for just you and I. That's why I come here in the mornings to meet with the Father, not because I have to survive the day, but because I can't breathe without him. And so that's what this song is about. This song is about his breath. And I hope John 20, I hope that if you're Thomas, if you're feeling like Thomas, not because you're a doubter, but because you're just one person, and that this is such a big situation, if you're feeling like Thomas, I hope you see that Jesus stops for just him. And if you're feeling like the group that's like, man, we're all here together, but we're useless. What do we do in this situation? It's too big. Let's just lock the doors and hang out behind closed doors and be fearful and let our faith be stripped away and let our love. Jesus shows up and says, let me show you how in the midst of my suffering, I brought life. Because in him is life, John 1, and that life was the light of all men. Sorry, I went a little winded on that, but I hope John 20 brings you some encouragement. Andrea, this is for all of us, but it's for you. This is called Dry Bones. if you hang out just for a minute after, I'll pray for you guys. Valley is so familiar, different all the same. Vibrant life has been replaced, like a land laid to waste. It's calling out your name. Valley is so familiar, different all the same. And vibrant life has been replaced, like a land laid to waste. It's calling out your name. And nothing more than dry bones, nothing more than dry bones. I'm nothing more than dry bones unless you break. I'm nothing more than dry bones, nothing more than dry bones. Nothing more than dry bones unless you breathe. So just breathe. Won't you breathe? Come and breathe over me. Valley's so familiar, different all the same. Desert land once marked by flames, covered up in the graves until the word came and gave new life to dry bones. Life to dry bones, new life to dry bones. When you breathe, your new life to dry bones, new life to my bones, new life to dry bones. When you breathe, so just breathe. Won't you breathe? Life to dry bones, new life to these bones, new life to dry bones. When you breathe, new life to dry bones, new life to these bones, new life to dry bones. When you breathe, so just breathe. Over me, breathe new life to dry bones, new life to my bones, new life to these bones. When you breathe, a valley so familiar, different all the same. All right, love you guys.